Hello and welcome to another episode of Found It, Fetched It. This week we are going to be starting a new series with LWDG mindset coach Emma Liddell. Now this is going to be a very different series because we're looking at the 7 lenses of dog behaviour, which you may be thinking, talking about dogs, she talks about mindset. But we really think that people understanding this a little bit more will actually help them with their confidence. So let's introduce you as the psychotherapist you are, but also how are we talking about dog behaviour with you?
I'm interested in brains. I don't really mind where the brain belongs, to be honest. And as much as I love human brains, I've been working with human brains for a very, very long period of time now. And that's not to say that I know everything about human brains, because the human brain still surprises me on a daily basis. But obviously, as we know, I have working dogs. And while I have working dogs, some of my working dogs have problems, as we all do with our working dogs. And my inquisitive psychotherapist brain goes, I want to know more about that, because if I want to know how humans' brains work, why would I not want to understand how my dog's brain work? So I've done a huge amount of reading, research, been on courses, finishing a 3-year dog behaviour course, all those other things. And it has really helped me understand my dogs a little bit better. And I thought, why not share some of that knowledge with you to maybe look at training our dogs or seeing our dogs in a slightly different way.
And when you say you just brushed over there, I just done a 3-year course on dog behaviour, like loads of us want to know more about our dogs and we buy books and stuff, but you have literally just done a 3-year qualification in dog behaviour, haven't you?
Yes, I have. And I'm about to submit my final assessment. So I'm a little bit terrified about this, to be honest. So I passed the first 2 years, that's fine. And the final year is a dog behaviour case, essentially, just for them to look at the videos of what I've been doing with dogs, to really give it a comprehensive assessment of actually what I'm doing before I get signed off as somebody that is capable of going and assessing dogs and being able to look at dog behaviour. So it's a bit of a daunting thing for me. Where that goes for my career, I don't know. It certainly started off with, I just want to know more, rather than where I take that. And I still don't really know. But for me, it's about the knowledge. It's the knowledge that I can impart to my dogs, some of my friends and their dogs, and potentially members, to really understand their dogs from a different perspective at times.
I have this whole visualization now of me sitting on your therapy couch talking to you and my dog sitting next to me and you being like, that's not what your dog is thinking, Joanne. Like a marriage counselling for dog and owner. But before we go into my brain and where we're going with this, why did you want to do it? Like you say about, you brush over, I've got dogs. You found some parts of your dogs, like we do, their behaviour quite challenging, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll have probably heard that from my Mindset Mondays. I often talk about my middle dog, Scout. He has been by far, and I say this because I haven't trained many dogs. I'm not a professional dog trainer. I haven't had gun dogs for a long period of time, but only from experiences that I've had with other trainers who've been really honest with me. He has been an exceptionally stubborn and hard dog to train, and yet very soft at the same time. There have been a number of events where I've walked away in tears, wondering what I'm going to do with my dog. There's been a number of other events where dog trainers have said, this is over and above my skill set. And this hasn't been about destructive behaviour. This hasn't been about aggression or destructive barking. He's actually a very calm, settled dog in the house. But this has been about his behaviour out in the field and bringing him on as a gun dog, which has been a really big journey, which I'm sure we could do a whole podcast at another point about my world of understanding an HPR and an HPR crossbreed that is my dog. So I say that I almost kind of came into it, not through sheer desperation, but for me just going, the tools I have when I look at my dog are not working. The trainers that I'm going to see, the tools they have are not working. There must be something bigger at play when I consider my dog's behaviour, rather than they're doing this, this is the tool and technique I need to do to get them to do that. There is, if our bodies as humans are super complex, and that's what I used to see in my clients, and it's not just about one thing, it's about looking at the whole body and the whole person, and their brain being a small part of that. Why would that not be the same for our dogs?
Can you walk us briefly through each of the 7 lenses? Just give us a sentence or 2 about each one, because we're going to be exploring each one in detail in future episodes. Can you just tell me more about what the series will look like?
Yeah. So the 7 lenses that we tend to look at, or that I've certainly been learning about and understanding, and I'll list the 7 off, and then I'll go through them kind of in order. The first is about evolution and domestication. The next one is about genetics, our dog's actual genetics, what makes our dogs dogs. The next bit is the neurobiology, the bit that goes in our brain. The endocrinology, so the hormones that go on in the body, the chemicals that happen in the body. Our physiology, so thinking about our dog's 5 senses and what goes on in there. The cognition and emotion, so that's our brain and how we feel. And then the last bit is actually sociology and body language. So how do we read our dogs? And actually, how do dogs fit into our world? Because it's really interesting to understand from different countries and different cultures how people view dogs. So it's really important to understand everyone will view our dogs slightly differently. And if we are looking at it purely from a dog point of view, I think it's really important to consider all of those factors when we understand why our dog behaves in a certain way or might be doing a certain thing, if that makes sense. So I know they're probably quite long and confusing terms such as neurobiology and endocrinology and physiology, but it's a really good thing to get our head around, and they're not as scary as they first sound, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's something that you and I have always done incredibly well within the LWDG is relate things to what we see in humans. And I think that makes it easier for me to understand, for other people to understand. Like I'll say something and our members get it, and then I'll say something like, oh, and this is like when a kid does this, and it just sticks because we have that relatability of experience with humans, whereas we don't maybe have so much relatable experience with dogs. It just gives us a sense, a point of reference, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think context is key, and I think that's where examples are so helpful. I learn by example. So if someone gives me a theory, I go, okay, cool, I kind of get that, I think. And if someone goes, but this is how it would look in practice, or here is an example of that theory, then I'm like, oh, I get why that's important now, or that makes sense to me because I understand as a human, I think like this. So why would my dog not do that? Or yes, I've seen that in a child's behaviour, or yes, I've seen that in a dog's behaviour before. So now I'm starting to understand. I think context is really key to help us embed understanding and learning. Otherwise, it's just theory.
You mentioned on the weekend event about how you came into the LWDG through sort of hot mess handler, where we were looking at all the problems our members had faced. And out of all the lenses that you've learned about and you've studied, which do you find our handlers tend to overlook the most? And why do you think that is the case?
I think the neurobiology and the endocrinology aspects of it are the bits we overlook because we just see a behaviour. And it's really important to go, okay, but why might that behaviour be happening? Is it because they are having a biological response in their body? Is it because it's a hormonal benefit to them? And we'll go into kind of what endocrinology looks like. Is it about, the fact our dogs are different to us? So for example, in neurobiology, we know that predation, so our dog trying to stalk something or get something, gives them a dopamine reward. So that's their seek and reward. So when we think about our spaniels, we think, why is my spaniel always going off into the hedgerow and playing hunting and doing whatever else? Or why does my dog immediately stop and look at a bird? Well, actually, from a neurobiology point of view, it releases dopamine. And they're going to want to do that. It's a motivational hormone. So it's really important to understand that sometimes it's not just our dog being an idiot or not liking us. There's so much more at play behind the scenes with our dog's physical makeup, whether that's their hormones, whether that's their brain, whether that's genetics, what they're bred to do, whether it's evolution over time, like why do we have dogs in the first place, whether that's about the physiology, about how our dog is physically constructed. And then we think about cognition and emotion. And we tend to focus more on the cognition and emotion and behaviour and kind of the body language side of it because it's visible. We can kind of see that really easily. For us to go, well, mainly what's going on for my dog at this point is a lot harder. So we tend to just focus on body language. What is my dog physically telling me by how they're standing, about whether their mouth's open, whether they've got a tight, rigid stance, whether they've got a loose stance, whether their tail's wagging with a gentle wag, whether it's a really stiff wag, which could be a sign of aggression. We tend to focus on all of those things, but we don't actually think about what's going on in the body.
Yeah, and I think if you were to ask many of our members and talk to them about those lenses, even if they were aware of them, I think we tend to only look at behaviour, like you said, through a single lens.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're taught to do. That's what the whole of the industry tells us. And I'm not saying we don't touch on other stuff, because, for example, we may ask questions, or the experts may ask questions, things like, could they be in season? Could something be in season in the area? And we go towards those fringes, but maybe we're not actually explaining, or I've not had it explained to me, that we need to be looking at those things individually to understand the whole. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think that was really helpful when I was looking at Scout's behaviour, because I was like, right, evolutionary and domestically, what have I got here? And I'll touch on them and I'll give some examples because it will really help you understand where we're going with this in a minute. Evolutionary, why is my dog doing this? Why is it in benefit for his evolution? Because dogs they're built for survival. Genetically, what have I actually got? Now, the reality is Scouts come from a farm in Wales. So genetically, I have no idea what I've got. Whereas if you've got breeding lines, then you might have a huge amount of answers as to genetically what's going on for your dog. And, you know, there were some really good examples. There was a wonderful talk by Louise about genetics and breeding and health testing and all those other things. So for me, I'm like, from a genetics lens, apart from the fact that I know he's a working breed and working breeds are generally have genetic predispositions, I don't know what I've got. So that lens is not going to be as useful to me. So then I would go from a neurobiology point of view, why might he be behaving like this? From an endocrinological point of view, why might he be behaving like this? From a physiological point of view, why might he behaving like this? And suddenly I had more options rather than, well, I've only got this or this, and neither of them seem to work. So what's going on? So why is my dog doing this? I was like, oh, I could start looking at it from a different lens, which may give me different options, which then means my response to my dog is going to be different.
Yeah, and I think that's such a fascinating thought, isn't it? Because when we're allowed to look at everything, being able to see a clear picture, that can make us feel that it is personal. That can make us feel like, oh, it's just me and my dog are not getting on. And that can end up with dogs ending up in rescues or being rehomed or whatever. Whereas what we're discussing here is something that I think the experts teach, but we are bringing the psychology side as people to it, is why you need to realize it definitely isn't just you.
Yeah, you've got a whole amount. So bear in mind, you've got a whole other being. That whole other being has a huge amount. Just how our bodies are incredibly complex for us to be able to survive. Our dogs are the same. They're incredibly complex, but different because they're dogs. They're not humans. So unless we have a really good understanding of what makes a dog, and most specifically when we're going into it, potentially a gun dog breed, we're not going to know. And I think it just gives us more alternatives, more options. And it doesn't necessarily mean you don't think, well, I've just got something wrong. It's like there's other factors at play here. There's a huge amount of other factors, genetic factors, hormonal factors, you know, when we're talking about the endocrine system, that might also be contributing to this behavior. So it's the same way, even as a psychotherapist, if someone talks to me about their mood, I'm going to talk to them about their health. I'm going to talk to them about their diet. I'm going to talk to them about their last blood test. Because I want to rule out all of the factors before I go, right, it's just psychological, because it might be physiological. You know, a lot of dogs, we know, the experts talk about this quite often when we talk about a dog being reactive. Are they in pain? So it's not a reactive dog because of a behavioural issue. It's a reactive dog because of a pain issue. And unless we look up all of those lenses, we're never really going to get a rounded view of options as to what's going on with our dog. And we're just going to focus on their behaviour. And the behaviour is just an output because of all of these 7 lenses.
It's fascinating. Like, even simple things. Like yesterday, I was searching for, remember on the weekend that Georgie showed us the thing with the raven who could fix the problem. So I was like, oh, I'm trying to find that video. I want to make sure we link it so in the recordings people can see it. And I came across another video that was on about dogs. And it talks about like how wolves and dogs split, and, you know, we got a domestic dog. And then it went on to say, and I'd never heard it before, about a wolf can't raise its eyebrows, but a dog can. And a dog learned that if it raises its eyebrows and looks sad, there's more likely a human will feed them. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, you sly little monkeys.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of blend one, which is about evolution. So the fundamental part of evolution, or the question we should be asking, is what makes behaviour happen? Now, behaviour happens for survival. That's the basic part. We evolved to survive. Now, whether that's a lizard, whether it's a dog, whether it's a human, whatever it might be, we evolved to survive. So if the dog understands that by learning to raise its eyebrows, it's more likely to be fed and it's more likely to survive, the dogs that raise their eyebrows are more likely to live. The ones that don't die. They then go on and breed, which means that their genetic encoding, because the lenses are all intrinsically linked, means that actually these things happen. There's another really good example, which is, it's an uncomfortable one, but a nice one. It's called the fox farm experiment. And so they kept these foxes in not very nice circumstances. But what they did is they only selectively bred the foxes for tameness. So they had no issues about what the fox looked like, the colour, not fussed about that. The only factor they were looking for was tameness. And within a really short, so it happened super quickly, only within a couple of generations, when we think evolution takes hundreds of thousands of years at times, their behaviour changed, their coat changed, the quality of their coat changed. They started wagging their tails. So the tamer foxes wagged their tails. They started developing floppy little ears rather than pricked up fox ears. And so essentially they became more dog-like. And that was only within a couple of generations of breeding, when they were only selected for tameness. So it's important to understand our dogs are a byproduct of survival because of domestication, because they have become domesticated over the years. And we're not quite sure still how they've become domesticated, like where the first wolves kind of then started splitting off and becoming dogs, so to speak. Whether we kind of captured them and took them when they were young and started using them for our reasons, or whether they actually started integrating with us, staying on the outskirts of our communities, foraging for food. We then started feeding them. We liked it because they were protective, because they kept away predators. We don't really know exactly what happened there, but we know that at some point there was an element of cooperation between humans and wolves. And then that split off because those wolves were succeeding, they were breeding. And then we started potentially breeding for selective traits, which we have a huge amount of breeds of dogs now, which are bred for selective traits. And our gun dogs being a great example of that. So it's really important to understand what makes behaviour happen. Generally, at a base level, it's survival. What is the survival level of behaviour? So even when our dogs are behaving in a certain way, is it an intrinsically survival tactic for them? Is that, so when we're thinking about things like prey drive and things like that, are we just triggering something that evolutionary is really important to our dogs? So it's understanding that's going to be quite hard when we've had, thousands and thousands of years of that. How does it develop over the dog's lifetime? So is it evolution in our dog's own behaviour, or is it evolution of dogs or breeds as a whole? So as we know, we are selecting spaniels and Labradors that are more biddable over the years. So the breed lines that we are seeing are more biddable and softer because it's easier for them to train. So that might happen in our lifetime or generations, or it might be evolution in that dog's own lifetime, or it might be dogs as a whole over thousands of years. A bit mind-blowing, I know.
But it is fascinating how quickly the change can happen, because I have definitely seen in the small time I have been involved, and I've spoken to many people who've been involved far longer than me, how quickly they've seen the spaniel change to this most smaller, almost cocker size, biddable little hunting dog. And then when I had Arthur, and I saw Arthur's dad, Arthur's my pup, and his dad is like standing at Labrador size, I was really excited to see what, even in my short time in dogs, this like traditional dog. And then I look at him now, he's not from trial in lines like my other dogs. And even as a pup, and he may shock me because he's still got to go through adolescence and everything else, but even as a pup, he's calmer and more confident, and it's the way he's being raised by Louise as well, without a shadow of doubt. But he's calmer and more confident around things. He doesn't get his head turned by as many things. So when I was doing like socialization, exposing him to stuff, whereas with the other pups, they would have all been like, ooh, I had Ella from the time she was born. Ooh, what's that? Even if she'd been fine with it. Arthur doesn't even look at it. He's a little bit like, yeah, there's like a lorry flying past. And I know it can change, but his temperament, when I relate it to Ella's at this age, they're like chalk and cheese.
That's an evolution of a breed. And that feeds beautifully into the second lens, which is genetics. Because we, in the wild, we can't choose who breeds with what. That's something that we have no control over. But if you think about, there's only 3 predators that we've ever domesticated: cats, dogs, and ferrets. Those are the only 3 predators that we've ever managed to domesticate, really, to a significant degree. And 2 of those have been because we've wanted to use them. Ferrets, obviously we use them, we work ferrets. They've been useful to us. Cats, I'm not really sure. I'm sure there's probably a purpose for them. Someone wants to let me know, please do, apart from them being a nice pet. But dogs, most especially, we started breeding and selectively breeding them for specific reasons. And some of those might be pet dogs, some of it might be for aesthetics, or some of it might be for working. So if we think about genetics, is another really interesting thing of what have I actually got in my dog? So 10 to 40% of us is our genetics. So 10 to 40% of what makes me is my genetics, and 60% is environment. So when we're thinking about things like dog breeding, 40% is a significant part of what my experience of my dog is going to be like. So when we're talking about proper breeding and we're talking about getting dogs from good breeders and good breeding lines, it is really, really, really important, because potentially 40% of that is kind of relatively fixed, because our DNA is fixed. And then we've got what we call epigenetics. So like if we think about DNA as kind of like our hardware and epigenetics is our software, so that's malleable, we can do stuff with that. So it's really important to think about it right down to like fundamentally, if we've got a fearful mother and they have fearful responses, even they won't necessarily learn it from the mother's behaviour, it will be passed on to their children. And that happens in humans as well. We talk about generational trauma. We talk about, trauma being passed on from mother to child when the child is still in utero. It's exactly the same with dogs. So it's really important when we're selecting to breed, we always say, like, see the mum, if you can see the dad, or understand this or that, because genetics plays such a big part in our dogs. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a really big part of it. And often we overlook that. We just think about the dog's behaviour. We don't think about the genetics of our dog.
It is mad though, isn't it? Because I can remember watching something on YouTube, and it was, I can't remember the name of it, you might know about it. It was about the fact, like in the 1960s, in New York, they purposefully separated identical twins and didn't tell families to check how nature versus nurture. And there's an ethical consideration there, but I do think that when you look at what that found, it is absolutely fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we can never just look at environment or just genetics. There is, when we talk about nature and nurture, there is always an interaction between the two. So, and again, we often focus on the environment the dog is in, and we don't focus on the genetics of the dog as well. And that is something that we have to consider. And certainly that was something I overlooked when I was considering my relationship with Scout. I was just seeing him as a dog. I wasn't considering his breed as a dog. So I was assuming, well, it'd be the same, not the same as a Spaniel or a Labrador. Like, I knew that wasn't going to be the case, but I didn't realise how significant potentially genetics would play in his role as a working dog. I just kind of thought, well, he's a dog and he's a working dog, so he's going to be high maintenance and he's going to be a bit of a highly strung dog, but that's about it.
We're doing the series. How do you see the 7 lenses supporting people who feel overwhelmed with this or failing with their dogs? Why are we doing this?
I think it's about, as you work through it, just consider how that impacts your dog and your dog's training. And it's not about saying, oh, you can say, well, it's in their genetics. Again, even when I talk about therapy, I talk about awareness, because awareness leads to choice and choice leads to change. So if I'm aware of the genetic impact of my dog, or if I'm aware of the neurobiological issues within my dog, and I don't mean like neurological issues, but as in what goes on in the neurobiology of my dog's brain, then I'm going to potentially have a choice to do something differently. And that might be around frustration towards myself. That might be around frustration towards my dog. And that might even be looking at dealing with the whole situation completely differently to the way you would before. So I think it gives you more choices. the whole point is about awareness, about going, these are all other options you could be considering when you're looking at your dog doing something, because that might better inform you when you make a decision about what you want to do about that thing.
So which lens do you feel most drawn to teaching about first in our series, and why?
I think we kind of need to start with evolution, because we have to understand how our dogs have become dogs. When I first started reading about it, I thought, oh God, evolution and sociology, this is all very boring. But actually, I think they are key to understand how have our dogs evolved to being the survival creatures that we have, although we might look at our dogs and think, oh my God, they'd never survive in the wild. Certainly I look at Watson and think he'd be gone in a moment. But he is still a working, he's still he is ingrained for survival. The other bit is the sociological aspect, which I never really thought about, which is who owns dogs? Why do we own dogs? What type of people own dogs? What are they used for? How do we train dogs? Especially the ethos of how we've trained dogs over the years, the idea of the outdated dominance theory and all of those other things, especially if you've had interactions either with family members to do with your dog and you may disagree about how you deal with something, or you've had negative experiences with trainers about your dog to understand where their perspective, their sociological perspective of dogs has come from. And sociological, the last bit is about body language, really understanding our dog's body language. What is my dog telling me when it's just sitting there looking at me? Like, what is actually going on? The bit that I think is probably going to be the most useful, probably the most daunting for people, is the neurobiology, the endocrinology, the physiological side of it, although that's very much more about our dog's five senses and how they interact with the world around us. The cognition and emotions, probably the bit that we focus on quite a lot, but trying to understand what might be going on in the neurotransmitters, the hormones in my dog, all of those other things, to kind of go, oh, okay, that's why my dog's wired to do that. And I've got to either work with my dog to get a better outcome, or I know that I'm going to be working against that. So what can I do to kind of help that happen?
Thank you very much, Em. I think that's the start of our little wander. We've gone quite deep already.
Yeah.
The 7 lenses of dog behaviour. This is going to be an eye-opening series, and I'm really excited about it because of the perspective Emma can bring to it, the conversations we can have around it. We really want you to think about how you think. If you're sitting there thinking, well, no wonder I've been feeling stuck, please know you're in good company. None of us were handed instruction manuals for our dogs or ourselves come to think about it. And over the coming months, we're going to just be peeling back each of the lenses one at a time, keeping it conversational, so you can start seeing your dog's behaviour in a way that feels a little less overwhelming and a lot more human. If something from today's chat has sort of struck a chord or just made you sigh a little bit of relief or be excited about what's coming ahead, please let us know, tag us, send us some messages on socials. We get back to every single one of them. Your stories is what makes the LWDG a safe space, because we share and show people that it's okay to be vulnerable and to say what's going wrong, and that you're not going to be chastised for that behaviour, and that in fact the community is going to go, it's okay, I'm with you on this. If your dog is at the moment giving you the impression of being a bull in a ring and you're really struggling, please take heart. You're probably doing better than you think. You don't have to figure it out all alone. We are here for you. Our members are here for you. Our membership is here for you. And obviously, gentlemen, if you're thinking, I can't get involved, yes, you can. We've got our hot mess handler. So that's all for this week. We shall see you in 2 weeks' time with the next episode. And we look forward to bringing you Emma for the series on the 7 lenses of dog behaviour. Goodbye.